Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Jean-Thomas Martelly. I'm a political scientist here based at the Centre de Sciences Humaines, CSH. On the behalf of the center of the CSH, it is my very great pleasure to welcome you for our 13th session of the seminar. And in fact, we have only 3 more sessions to go before the end of this academic year. So we're getting there. The CSH seminar and lecture series focuses on a wide variety of academic foci, ranging from modern and contemporary history to political economy. The Institute hosts a great variety of researchers with various specialization, ranging from demography, sociology, geography, and political science. Today we are organizing this seminar amidst kind of dramatic and very difficult circumstances that are unfolding in India and elsewhere, but particularly in India. We understand that some of you might have other concerns than listening and engaging with an academic presentation, and we also wanted to acknowledge that before starting the session, that we also extend our solidarity and our help to those who need it, because they are here, people who need any kind of assistance. I'm sure that we'd be happy to do whatever we can do for that. So as you know, the seminar is very much interdisciplinary. In the 3 last sessions, so we have a session every 15 days, twice a month. On 31st of May, we'll be receiving Irudaya Ranjan, who is the chairman of the International Institute of Migration and Development. We'll be discussing migration in return of migrants after these 2 episodes of COVID. The 14th of June, we'll be receiving Anna Rudok. She's a medical anthropologist, writer, and disability activist, with a forthcoming book with Stanford University Press on medical students at AIMS, the ethnography of the learning process. And finally, we have a last session on 28th of June, and we'll conclude the seminar. But without entering too much into details on this, we want to forward a warm welcome to Dr. Anaga Ingole. Anaga teaches at the Department of Political Science at the University of Hyderabad. She has studied at GNU, at the CPOD, and SIS, School of International Studies. But she was also a Fulbright Postdoctoral Research Fellow at Columbia University in New York. She's the author of a forthcoming book titled Caste Panchayats and Caste Politics in India, which will be published very soon with Palgrave Macmillan. And today, Anaga will be presenting on Caste Panchayats, and Anaga will be discussing about the interaction and the relationship between caste-based conservatism and electoral politics. So without delay, Anaga, the floor is yours. Don't hesitate to ask us anything. And meanwhile, if people have questions while you're presenting, don't hesitate to drop a line or to write your question in the chat box, or wait and be patient in the end of the session. Anaga, the floor is yours.
Right, thank you. Thank you, CSH, for asking me. Thank you, Jotoma, thank you, Julian, and everyone else who's joining us in this rather difficult time. I'll directly jump into the subject of my presentation, that is the Caste Panchayat. So Caste Panchayats, or Jat Panchayats as they are known widely in India, have been understood as age-old intra-caste justice dispensation bodies. They got national attention lately because of the gruesome punishments meted out by them against young couples opting for choice marriages, or against women trying to police their domestic and public lives by the use of communal force. Now, these panchayats do indeed act as enforcers of caste endogamy, and they try to police women's lives. And this understanding, therefore, is not at all misplaced. Nevertheless, this understanding is far from sufficient and is based deeply on our limited interactions and encounters with these panchayats in the context of the 20th century Indian polity, and also an act of methodological slight in the scholarship on caste. So, in effect, what I'm saying is, depending on which era you choose to study them in, these panchayats have been preoccupied with different concerns contingent upon the needs of group preservation. Further, what makes this interesting from the point of view of the study of politics is that these concerns have been deeply linked to the outlook of the political authorities in respective periods, and also towards caste governance in general, and caste panchayats in particular. So let me begin by underlining that even in the present context, the caste panchayats do perform many more functions that use equally enforced and cruel methods, such as, say, caste ostracization. And a large part of these functions are political functions. And this is what I'm going to concern myself with. By political functions, I mean groups trying to shape their political behavior for group-based access to welfare schemes, or in drawing up on group identity to accrue benefits of affirmative action to their respective castes. In saying this, I do not deny that the control over women's bodies and relationships have political import. Quite the contrary. I would like to argue that these punishments are meted out also by political considerations as much as they are by genuine reactionary misogyny. In a lot of cases, the latter is reinforced by the former. So before I chart into this further, let me say why is it productive to look at caste panchayats in this temporally and sort of conceptually expansive way. Firstly, I think it gives an explanation of why these bodies have a social sanction despite being extrajudicial bodies, and they're working often contradicting the aspirations of the young in the community. More consequentially, the power of social ostracization or social boycott that these caste panchayats hold has something very significant to offer to us to understand the political life of caste in India. This is because of its connection to the ritualistic aspects of caste, from where ostracization originates, and the way it has been used to regulate not just the social, but also political control. This was done by the higher castes and the pre-modern political authorities in the past, and now the power largely lies in the hands of the intra-caste elites. Secondly, I think this kind of a study exposes a conceptual move that was made in the 1960s and 70s, when the study of caste in politics and its legitimacy had to be argued for. Now, this arguing was done by eminent scholars like Rajni Kothari in a context where the study of social sciences was heavy with the dominance of the modernization theory. It is here that a sort of new conceptual category of the caste association gets introduced. And I argue that this conceptual move was responsible for the invention of an empirically incorrect distinction between regulatory or sanctimonious caste bodies on the one hand, and political or mobilizational caste bodies on the other. Finally, in explaining why the caste panchayats and their role was relegated to the sociological and anthropological life of caste, it gives us a scope to explore caste panchayats as a vehicle to study caste-based conservatism and how that is conserved by politics of the post-independence nation state. Through this interaction, it also reveals how post-independent state, in its attempts to democratize ameliorations on the basis of caste, creates what I call a new framework of caste governmentality. So it is in explicating these three claims that I will commit the next 40 minutes that I have. And the first two claims, that is about the political sanction of caste panchayats via its control over the social life of caste members. And the second claim about this invisibilizing of the caste panchayat as a category through which to study politics sort of serve as premises that foreground my third and key claim about present day motivations of caste conservatism in Indian politics and how the post independence Indian polity has sort of fostered it. So, let me begin then by speaking about social ostracization. Social ostracization, also called as social excommunication or social boycott, is typically a form of punishment meted out to a member of one's own caste by a caste assembly for not adhering to the discipline of the caste. In The Annihilation of Caste, Dr. Ambedkar writes about the power of social ostracization, and I quote, he says, "Now a caste has an unquestioned right to excommunicate any man who's guilty of breaking the rules of the caste. And when it is realized that excommunication involves a complete cessation of social intercourse, it will be agreed that as a form of punishment, there is really little to choose between excommunication and death. No wonder individual Hindus have not had the courage to assert their independence by breaking the barriers of caste." End of quote. So, if one really wishes to look at the power of the caste panchayat and the traditional power of the caste panchayat, it is here in its power of enforcing social ostracization that one should look for it. Now, there's an obvious physical aspect to this ostracization, which means that one's touch may be considered polluting. No one is to visit the house of the ostracized. In many cases, the ostracized family is made to live outside the village or leave the village altogether. No daily provisions are sold to them, and no economic transactions are made. The ostracized may not be allowed to enter the village, and people deny them the right to a passage from within their fields, etc. All this makes livelihood difficult in a tightly knit and interdependent village based community. Yet, even as such livelihood dependence on caste relations has loosened, even in the rural context, what seems to have persisted, and this is reflected, you know, quite sharply in many cases that are registered against the caste panchayats, is a deep fear and a sort of debilitating effect of the social aspect of ostracization. This is so because such ostracization pushes the caste member to the margins of the group, where the member neither completely belongs to her own caste nor can she take up the membership of any other caste. This results in a complete and sudden loss of belonging. The group membership of the ostracized is put in a sort of abeyance. They are in a state where they have no place in the social scheme of things. This creates a very peculiar social situation for the ostracized, as there is no social life outside the caste in a caste universe. One's everyday life, customs, ceremonies, various symbolisms around one's social acceptance as a member of the community, such as, say, the vermilion ceremony, where women adorn each other's foreheads with a red colored powder, or the sharing of the hookah or tobacco among men, which are all symbols of common social life and mutual social recognition of one's rank, and even socialization of children, etc., is abruptly discontinued. On the other hand, in the urban contexts where one's social life may not be completely dependent on one's caste relations, ostracization can mean truncating of one's social life, as marriage relations are, in a majority of cases, sought to be established within one's own caste. If any family offers marriage to relations of an ostracized family, they too are ostracized. So, most individuals for whom their immediate life in their caste and community groups forms the only scale of their social experience, these episodes of ostracization bring on a deep sense of indignity, extreme humiliation, and a loss of the sense of self. Social ostracization has been in the past and continues to be used today to enforce political loyalty. In the Konkan region of Maharashtra, for example, there's a system of call whereby members of a caste are made to take an oath to vote for a particular leader every election. And those who breach the oath are ostracized. Each caste does it to create a block of votes for their caste members, which is then used either to demand a ticket for the representative from the caste from a political party, or to make other demands with regard to government schemes, etc. There are many other instances from all over the country where the elected leaders and local officials have to fall in line with the caste panchayats if they do not wish to be ostracized. So, this is how caste panchayats use their social force to seek political compliance. However, this does not tell us anything beyond the local power of the caste elite and how that tries to control political decisions of its caste members. So, from the perspective of the caste member, why does compliance to political decisions of caste panchayat gets observed? Unless the group as a whole has no political interest attached to these actions. I and I, through my work, argue that it does. So this requires me to take a slight detour to say how caste panchayats have historically been organizing the navigation of political life of caste groups, and why is it that we have a complete invisibilizing of this role in the scholarly literature on caste. This brings me to the second claim. So, in what form caste groups came to be understood as having become secularized and thus performing political functions of registering themselves in the census and seeking ameliorations on the basis of it in the colonial period played a very important role here. Uh, O'Malley, who was the Bengal gazetteer for the 1911 British Census of India, noted three examples of this secularization. First was the Goala Caste Sabha of Bihar, which abolished two practices, the practice of infant marriage as well as the practice of women going to the market to sell milk. The second example that he quotes is that of the Doshad caste, described as a degrading cultivating caste by Risley in 1891, who served as village watchmen. This caste had ruled for excommunicating its members who were caught stealing. The last and final example was that of the Saha Caste Panchayat, which had collected funds to send some students of its own caste to Japan. All these bodies were characteristic caste panchayats using primordial methods such as excommunication and loyalty enforcement. Yet, because of the functions they were performing by employing these methods, O'Malley thought that these degrading castes were finally modeling themselves after the modern civilized Europeans. Now, moving forward to the 1960s, it was this very caste sabha that was characterized as the voluntary caste association in the scholarly literature without recognizing its continuity with the caste panchayats, a continuity which is established by one of the defining criteria of caste panchayats, the traditional methods that they employ to carry out functions which may be modern or traditional. The assumptions of O'Malley were uncritically adopted by the scholarship because of their failure to get this defining criteria right. As a result, the term caste sabha came to be often used interchangeably with the new term caste association. The Rudolphs, in particular, confuse defining criteria with further non-defining properties of these caste organizations. In fact, most caste bodies retained their legacy of non voluntary methods of loyalty enforcement. You may even find the Rudolphs unconsciously acknowledging this when they use the observations of Edgar Thurston, who was the governor of Madras, appointed on the Ethnographic Survey of India project to declare that castes in India are forming new caste associations. Thurston observed that castes have been closely bound together by an organization managed by one of their caste who was a prominent person in these parts, that they are tending gradually to approach the Brahmanical standard of social conduct, discouraging adult marriage, meat eating, and widow remarriage, etc. He then also refers to a document from 1904 that came before one of the courts. He says that this document showed that in the previous year, that is in 1903, representatives of one caste from 34 villages in a district had bound themselves in writing under penalty of excommunication to refrain from the practices formerly in existence, that of marrying two wives and of allowing a woman to marry again during the lifetime of her first husband. So he's clearly speaking of the caste panchayats. Yet Rudolph's use this very ethnographic data to conclude, and I quote, uh, when these new caste associations turned to politics at the turn of the century, their main target was the census office, for its listing of caste and caste descriptions became more real than reality itself, carrying as it did the authority of official imprint. End of quote. This is the confusion of method and function that I'm suggesting gets the identification of the bodies wrong. It is a confusion of what defines and identifies the body with a further descriptive property of it that is not definitional. Now, these are really serious scholars. So, what really motivates this inability to see caste panchayats for what they are? My reasoning is as follows. As with many other subjects in the social sciences, the subject of caste was dominated for many years by what came to be known as the modernization theory. As is also well known, this domination has been resisted by a wide range of scholars in the last few decades and from many different angles. On the subject of caste panchayats, however, even some who at times exposed critical views of modernization theory succumbed indirectly and in subtle ways to some of its underlying assumptions, which blinded much of the commentary to the loyalty enforcing character of caste panchayats. To briefly summarize, modernization theory took for granted that social and political change in nations such as India would undermine the primordial ties of caste. The liberal elaborations of such claims stressed on the emergence of political institutions, legal constitutional developments around formal democracy, and the increasing development of secularized education as the engines of change. More left oriented elaborations stressed on the emergence of greater class solidarities as a result of industrial growth economies founded on what Marx had called primitive accumulation, which would destroy the traditional social ties of rural life. Much of the widely read scholarship on caste was dominated by the first of these elaborations, that is, the liberal elaboration. And one strand within this liberal elaboration was represented by the early writings of Rajni Kothari. And this scholarship resisted the standard anthropological assumptions of dichotomy between society as a domain of tradition and polity as a domain of modernity, challenging it through empirical studies to demonstrate how the two were shaping each other. This had the effect of seeing caste, hitherto viewed as purely social phenomena, in more politicized terms. Another strand, though, to be found in the work of Susan and Lloyd Rudolph, who studied caste group behavior from the period just before the British census, brought to center stage the category of caste associations conceived along Tocquevillian lines. Both Kothari and the Rudolphs went on to be quite critical of the modernization theory. But it is interesting that for all their repudiation of it, they retained an underlying modernist strain in the study of caste. The very idea of caste association was conceived on the more general modernist idea and ideal of voluntary associations. The Rudolphs actually and quite influentially read the idea of caste panchayats through the lens of such a notion of caste association. This, when combined with Kothari's emphasis on the political aspects of caste in a context of the emergence of late colonial political institutions and post colonial secular developments, had a distorting effect on what came to be the prevalent understanding of caste panchayats. It led to the panchayat being considered political by virtue of its secular demands and efforts to secure Western education, higher economic and social status, and such for its caste members, an institution in short of modernity. But I want to establish first that whatever is right about it, it ought not to be something that hides from the view the pervasive persistence of the enforcement of caste loyalty by traditional methods employed by caste panchayats. Kothari himself noted that the writing on caste fell into the same modernization trap, again by imagining a total transformation of the caste system through its involvement in politics. But nevertheless, he understood caste associations as the democratic incarnation of caste. It is not as if there is no truth to this perspective on caste associations. There is no doubt that there had emerged in the last half of the century or more of British rule, and then since decolonization, many caste associations that exemplified some of these assumptions, which became the source of modernization theory. As a result, though, caste panchayats were largely seen in relatively innocuous terms, mostly as sites of dispute resolution. And even when these loyalty enforcing methods or socially conservative functions could not be ignored, they were seen as aberrations. The anthropological evidence of the same period establishes that this was a distortion of reality. The Anthropological Survey of India, for example, documented several caste panchayats in the 1960s that were active in performing a variety of functions in addition to dispute settlements. Some of these functions were simply driven by social conservatism, seeking to preserve the norms and practices of a caste by using punishment to deter departures from them. Many of these caste panchayats were simply ensuring that differentiation from the untouchables in the hierarchy was clearly maintained. These functions were self consciously opposing modernizing trends. But many functions of caste panchayats were driven by goals of amelioration for the caste along altogether benign lines. So the very same backward caste panchayats, for instance, devised new norms to be adopted to resist oppression by upper castes. They also frequently registered themselves as higher caste in the census, thereby employing Sanskritization. The 1911 Census Office reports being bombarded with such requests. To mention only a number of examples, I'll just mention one example from 1961, where a caste panchayat of a Baba caste in the state of Orissa resolved to change a set of practices which were considered lower in the light of their own caste's educational status and economic strength. And they advertised this in the newspaper that whosoever now would practice these, so-called lower practices would be excommunicated from their caste. So, what is most interesting here is that there's a continuity with the past, which was hidden. Because when in the late colonial period, Sanskritization took this form of caste panchayats, registering with the census office and requesting higher status to gain eligibility for occupations hitherto unavailable to them, Sanskritization itself began to be seen as not merely a amelioration for the caste, but a process of modernity. The long-standing practice of Sanskritization became situated in a statist and institutional context, giving it a political veneer that allowed scholars to see it as a modernizing function of caste panchayats that colonialism had made possible. After all, appealing to a state office for social mobility, jobs, and so forth bore all the signs of incipient political modernization. In doing so, however, the distinction between function and method, a deep though elementary point, got lost. The focus on so called modernizing function removed attention from the fact that Sanskritization had always been done through the coercive primordial practices of social boycott or excommunication of members who did not adopt the new practices that would help to elevate the caste. Indeed, many of the other ameliorative functions mentioned above, quite apart from Sanskritization, were also achieved by these coercive methods of enforcing caste loyalty to preserve the norms and identity of the caste. So the crucial point is simply this, that because of an easily exposed methodological sleight of hand, uh, this evasion of the distinction between method and function, a great deal of the scholarship on caste has remained unaware of the enforcement of loyalty for political functions by caste panchayats. I want to turn now to arguing that caste and caste panchayats over the past many decades have indeed been entirely caught up in the politics of their time, and moreover, that the enforcement of caste loyalties is really perhaps nothing but the enforcement of political loyalties today. This requires a closer look at the developments of the politics around caste in the post-colonial period. In the post-colonial period, for you know some decades even earlier, you have jati clusters that came to have a special kind of prominence in the politics after India gained independence from the British rule. As a caste phenomena, jati clusters owe their origins to the formation of horizontal links between similar jatis in different regions of the country, seeking the advantage of greater numbers in the representational politics ushered in by India's newly formalized constitutional democracy. With such lateral affiliations, many caste panchayats and associations spanned multiple jatis and thereby acquired a wider range of powers to exert political influence. As is widely known, politics in India in the first few decades after independence was dominated by the Indian National Congress, whose dominance took a particular form that commentators have called the Congress system. As a consequence, the party had to be polycentric. It had to have one kind of rhetoric and one set of political pursuits at the central or the federal level, especially under Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, articulating a quasi socialist emphasis on class based politics and national economic development, as well as issue of caste and religion as grounds for political mobilization. At the same time, because of the party's failure to carry out extensive land reforms, politics at the regional and local levels had to rely on mobilizations which were based on more traditional identities. Caste was thus given voice and extensive representation within Congress party through its regional political outposts, even if it went against the rhetoric of the center. The Congress Party's dominance over the first 3 decades after independence depended on this polycentrism, a unique mix of progressive ideology and pluralism based on traditional ties in the regions. It is at the regional and local levels that the local leaders of Jati clusters were central to what the Congress system relied on. In return for the largesse of political patronage that the party provided, these landed caste leaders delivered through their influence over their members the votes that the party needed in elections. Naturally, the landed castes were the most influential in their regions. This gave rise to the category of what sociologists have called dominant castes, castes that were poised to wield influence over other castes in a jati cluster, consisting of agricultural laborers and artisans of one or another sort who were beholden to landholders for their work and were therefore prepared to do the landowner's electoral bidding. Some instances of this are also reported in contemporary India, especially from UP. Very occasionally in the interstices, leaders of more deprived castes did gain some pockets of power and influence. In most cases, these local level leaders were also caste panchayat leaders or active members of caste panchayats. Consider, for example, this reporting from the seminar held by the government of Maharashtra for the first batch of elected panchayat leaders of the state from both the Zilla Parishad and the Panchayat Samiti levels in the year 1962. This was the first set of elected rural leadership after the introduction of the Panchayati Raj system in the state in 1961. Siriskar, who interviewed these leaders, noted, and I quote, he says, caste panchayats continue to play an important role in the socio-political life of the rural community in Maharashtra. Over 10% of the sample are heads of existing caste panchayats, while 20.9% are active members of caste panchayats. He further observed that 68.6% did not respond to this question, perhaps indicating that they were being more discreet than frank about it. Fast forward to 2017, from over the 400 cases that were launched against caste panchayat leaders in Maharashtra from just 3 districts, it was invariably found that in more than 1/3 of the cases, the head of the caste panchayat was also the sarpanch of the panchayat samiti or some other local level leader. Thus, there continues to be a high level coinciding of interests, leadership, and political activity between general panchayati politics of the village and the caste panchayats. Now, does this mean that nothing has changed in the sense that Louis Dumont thought, of caste as this never-changing continuous system? Not really. I think it means two things. It means A, that the very nature of modern democratic politics in India never shed the centrality of caste that both liberal and left versions of modernization theory had assumed would eventually occur. But it also brings to light a specific twist that modernization theory gets. And this is a modernist transformation of caste and religion into a set of political identities. In 1962, when Suriskar was writing, the social life of jatis was politically framed in jati clusters with caste leaders of the dominant castes in multiple horizontally affiliated jatis exerting their influence in the newly emerging democratic politics. But the caste elites who are exerting their power in 2017 are not from the same jatis. They are not from the dominant caste, but largely from the OBC caste, the other backward classes. And the way they have been transformed into political identities is by a process of what I would like to call caste governmentality. This change was brought about in interesting ways with a new politics of, what I would like to call a political culture of benefits. There is a larger global background to it. So, the Second World War was in some ways a watershed for generating a new ideal in Western nations of providing social safety nets. The state became a site of dispensing welfare benefits of one or another kind to reconstruct war torn economies, and Keynesian policies of demand management were widely adopted. There emerged a further demand for the state to provide special benefits to specifically disabled segments of the population. For instance, physical disability was seen as requiring special provisions over and above the standard benefits identified by economic criteria. It was then only a matter of time until a category emerged from the for the socially disabled, historically oppressed communities within a nation's population who continue to suffer under the legacy of past oppression. These ideas and ideals inevitably reached nation builders of erstwhile colonized nations, and in India, historically oppressed castes, often categorized as depressed classes or scheduled castes, was an obvious category in the population. Moreover, in India, there were already made articulations from the anti-caste thinkers such as Jyotirba Phule, but more clearly by Chhatrapati Shahu of Kolhapur, in making special state-backed policies for the betterment of the non-Brahmin castes in the field of education. Indeed, Dr. Ambedkar, a leader of the most subjugated of all castes, the Dalits, and an accomplished legal and constitutional theorist educated in the West, was one of the early pioneers of the idea of such affirmative action, channeling the confluence of both the indigenous articulations and this new global context. Largely as a result of his impressive advocacy, it came to be acknowledged that the Congress party throughout the freedom movement was wholly dominated by upper castes, that its predictable coming to power after independence would continue this upper caste hegemony unless the need for action on behalf of Dalits was recognized very early on in the formulations of the constitution as well as of policy. But the Dalits were in many ways an obvious case, highlighting their long historical subjugation did not much to unsettle the domination of the upper castes in the Varna system, and the economically well-heeled landed castes who exerted great influence in the politics of the Congress system. What had gone unacknowledged was a vast population of the lower caste peasantry and artisans hierarchically above the Dalits, but not part of the Varna system, hence the obviousness of their historical oppression, but below all the upper and intermediate castes. In recent years, these castes have come to be called the other backward classes. Until this entire stratum, by far the largest section of India's population, came to be recognized as special beneficiaries, there could be no serious undermining of upper caste hegemony. That is precisely why such recognition was kept in abeyance for decades after independence. Even when a commission was appointed in the mid 1950s to look into the possibility of benefits for them, its recommendations were rejected by the government under pressure from the Home Ministry, which was headed by an upper caste ideologue, Govind Ballabh Pant. So, throughout the entire period of the well oiled functioning of the Congress system, OBCs continued to suffer from deprivations that, though less obvious and manifest than the well known oppression of Dalits, were a simmering force of frustration and resentment in the majority of the new nation's citizens. It was only in the 1980s that a new commission was appointed under the stewardship of B.P. Mandal to address this chronic dissatisfaction among the hitherto unacknowledged castes in the post independence frameworks of affirmative action. The Mandal Commission proposed a range of benefits for the OBCs because they comprised a majority of nation's population. A whole new kind of politics emerged, overturning the stranglehold of patron-client relations between caste leaders of Jati clusters and the Congress party of the early post-independence years. Specifically, the Commission's report resulted in a fragmenting of Jati clusters into single Jatis, since each Jati among this lower peasant and artisan population now sought to claim the benefits that accrued to them according to the state's list of OBCs targeted for such benefits. This had a very powerful effect on the enforcement of caste loyalties. Caste panchayats of single jatis returned with full force as active enforcers of caste identity because, in order to be eligible for benefits, one's caste identity could not be compromised or dispersed. The Commission called upon these voluntary caste bodies, that's the term that the Commission uses, to make their representations. The household and individual forms were filled under the supervision of these caste leaders. The deterrence through social boycotts of any transgression that might dissipate caste identity became central to this new politics of caste. Let me give a vivid example. In general, the subject of caste is highly regionally grounded, with both large and subtle differences in many regions of the country. In the politics generated by the Mandal Commission report, the rise of the Kunbi caste panchayat, Kunbi is a peasant caste from Maharashtra, the rise of this panchayat in the western state of Maharashtra has been a focus of my research, and I think it has something significant to say. Curiously, this development is restricted to the western region of the state, the interesting explanation for which lies in the history of how caste politics had manifested itself in the state before Mandal, that is, before the 1980s. In Maharashtra, two castes called the Marathas and the Kunbis had a formidable caste cluster, the Jati cluster that we've been talking about, that had been the backbone of the Congress system in the state since independence. The Kunbis, who are considered lower in the caste hierarchy than the Marathas, constituted roughly 7% of this total cluster of about 35% of the state population, which made them electorally quite significant. With the Mandalization of politics, the Kunbis of the less prosperous eastern region were included in the OBC list, whereas the same caste in the western region was left out. This led to the gradual fragmentation of the cluster across the state. The caste panchayats in the west then sought a strategy to get themselves counted among the OBCs. To do this, the Kunbi caste panchayat in the various parts of the region distanced itself from the higher Maratha caste. As part of the process of gaining recognition as an OBC, Kunbi caste panchayats of this region carefully cultivated relationships with political parties perceived as useful to their cause and directed members to vote as a caste bloc for those parties. This explicit political participatory method was widespread among caste panchayats in many regions of the country. The process was first to declare caste members' support for a candidate in a political party with which a negotiation had been made for backing the caste's claim to the OBC status, and then to clearly advertise a threat that breaching the diktat to support the stated party would lead to social ostracization. In one such incident, the Kunbi caste panchayat of the village of Harihareshwar in the Raigad district socially excommunicated an elected village assembly chief for contesting election against a candidate supported by the caste panchayat. As a result of such episodes, national and regional parties in the area are often in a bitter rivalry to gain the support of the caste panchayats due to the control that they hold. Let me give one more example. Another caste cluster in Maharashtra that has undergone this kind of fragmenting in the post-Mandal era is the Bhatke Vimukta Jati, or the nomadic and denotified tribes, with particular castes such as the Vanzaris getting themselves included in the OBC list through political mobilization forged by caste panchayats' demands on political parties. The same caste in other regions is now making similar demands, often through caste panchayats. This fragmentation is not limited to the OBCs. Are we doing all right on time, John Thoma? Shall I include more examples, or I think you need to unmute. Are we good on time?
Yeah, we are good on time. We have around 15 minutes left if you are feeling so.
All right. So let's then look at a few more examples. So this kind of fragmentation of caste clustering is also taking place among the Dalits, with the introduction of target welfareist measures driven by electoral calculations in the post-Mandal era. The breaking up of Dalits into Mahadalit or Ati Pichhade, extremely backward, by the state, which began in Punjab in the mid 1970s, led to targeted policies for some Dalit castes. Many of these castes, such as the Balmikis and the Naubuddhas, who are the Naubuddhas or the Dalits who converted to Buddhism with Ambedkar, now show increased caste panchayat activity. Other lower castes, which are classified as SCs or scheduled castes in some regions and OBCs in some others, have also become fragmented from their respective clusters and have come to exhibit a higher occurrence of single caste panchayats. The Dhobis, that is the washerman caste, are an example of this. In Maharashtra, where they have been recognized as OBCs, the Dhobi community, called the Telugu Parits, they are infamous for the barbaric diktats of its caste panchayats. In Delhi, where they are classified as SC as opposed to OBCs in Maharashtra, there's a documented evidence that their caste panchayats hold a pre-vote before caste members vote in elections so as to ensure caste solidarity for collective benefits dispensed by the state. Other such examples are the Gomantak Bhandaris of the Goa region and Konkan region, and the Muslim Telis, who are the converted oil pressers, and the Lingayat Gavaris. The Gomantak Bhandaris are fragmenting from larger Bhandari cluster, a very important caste cluster constituting 30% of the population in Goa. And this group is demanding OBC status. The Gomantak Bhandari caste panchayat regularly forces its members to vote for a party that will back the demand and enforces its orders through social boycott of dissenting members. They recently got into a spat with the BJP in Goa. The Telis and the Lingayat caste panchayats also record similar behavior. So caste panchayats have thus become a disciplining body to bring the caste in line with states' policies for welfare-style benefits along affirmative action lines. Thus, it is that Foucauldian biopolitics went hand in hand with the endogamy preserving functions of caste panchayats, representing a whole new era of politics in India that emerged as a nationwide fallout from the path-breaking report of the Mandal Commission. The point here is this: these enforcements of caste loyalty by caste panchayats in the service of preserving caste identities for the past few decades are now almost wholly a political phenomenon. It is biopolitics. It is not primarily motivated by any ritual based ideal of preserving caste status. The very idea of ritual purity and impurity or sanctimonious regulation of caste members is completely integrated with and entirely inseparable from the political mobilization for benefit of one's caste. The clean distinction sometimes made by social theorists of castes between the regulative, sanctimonious, and political mobilizational in the understanding of caste really now must be allowed to lapse. Caste panchayats' functions of enforcing loyalty to caste norms so as to ensure endogamy and preserve caste identity is predominantly motivated by the modern concern that benefits dispensed by state continue to accrue to the caste. This is so even as their methods for ensuring loyalty are entirely continuous with the methods of long historical standing. As a result, inquiry into the very subject of caste can no longer be a sequestered pursuit of anthropology or sociology. The inquiry into caste is now an inquiry into the politics of a modern nation. One way of illuminating the nature of this point is to show exactly how it relates to the observation of earlier critiques of modernization theory, such as Rajni Kothari. who we've discussed earlier, that caste as a social phenomena can no longer be kept apart from caste as a category caught up in modern Indian politics. As we've discussed above, in much contemporary scholarship on caste, the caste panchayat remains unstudied as a regulating or loyalty enforcing body because its methods are ignored and the focus is on its function. Proper attention to methods would make it impossible to view caste panchayats along the lines of the modern voluntary association, familiar since Tocqueville introduced that category into the study of society and politics. If I'm right by looking at things this way, Kothari is given a foundation, one he himself does not highlight as much, for concluding that social aspects of caste are entangled with the political aspects. On the matter of the caste panchayat in particular, that foundation can be formulated as follows: qua function, that is the purpose of enforcing caste loyalty. The caste panchayat is rightly seen as political, while qua method of loyalty enforcement, one can get a clear sense of its social force. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that enforcement of loyalty to caste by caste panchayats has predominantly been driven by one or another form of politics that reflects what caste has become in India over the past century. It is a vivid case of primordial methods deployed in retaining age old endogamous relations for ends that have emerged in a thoroughly modern form of democratic politics and social policy, belying ideas of how communities enmeshed in primordial ties disappear with the consolidation of modern democracies, while revealing that what is retained in those primordial ties is nevertheless an essential part of modern democracy. That is to say, what gives caste panchayats their informal authority are often impeccably ameliorative ends for the caste in question. The larger conclusion that holds, of course, and I think it captures something fascinating and paradoxical about the relations between tradition and modernity in India. So I think I should stop here and we could discuss more if we have questions. Thank you for patiently listening to me.
Thank you, Anaga, for this richly textured and really dense and informative presentation. I'm sure there will be uh, tons of questions coming from the audience. So what I propose is that the bravest of all could unmute themselves and step in. Those who are feeling a bit more shy could raise their hands, and I will give them the mic in due time. And those who are extremely shy could just write it in the chat box, and I will do my best to ask the presenter the question. So who would like to be the first to further unpack Naga's presentation?
Yes,
Jules. Yes, Jules, go ahead. Jules, did you? Super.
Actually, can you hear me? Can you hear me properly, or
you are a little?
Okay?
Yeah, your voice is a little cut, but maybe you
let
could.
me try with the mic. With another.
Yeah, that is now that sounds better suddenly.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Cool. So thank you very much for this very enlightening presentation. I had just a small question about the power. So it's mainly about the first part of your presentation, about the power of exclusion that lies in the hand of caste panchayats. So you make the choice of using the word excommunicate, that is a word drawn from the vocabulary of the Roman Catholic Church. And I was wondering if it is on purpose. Why not simply use the term exclusion? And also, I draw attention on this word because in the Catholic Church, you cannot be excommunicated if you haven't first been baptized. And I was just wondering, to what extent do caste panchayats play a role in defining what are the limits of the caste community? Do they keep registers of the members of the community? Do they, or do they not, in a way or in another, sorry, organize baptisms into the castes, to follow up with the Christian analogy? And finally, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about what we know about the people who have been excluded by their original caste panchayats. What happened to them after they've been excluded? How do they get defined socially? How do they cope? Because you very quickly at some point mentioned an analogy between excommunication and death, and social death. But what do we know about that social death? Is it like literal death that follows? And anecdotally, I was wondering if you make any, for what kind of difference you make between caste association and caste panchayats, if you make any. That's already a lot, but thank you very much again.
Naga, would you like to engage with those questions, and then we'll move to Julien, who has a question for you also.
Sure. Okay, thank you for those three questions. So first of all, the use of the word excommunication. The word excommunication is used primarily in the British records and in the British census. Of course, these are not the words that are locally used, and there are a variety of different terms which are used in different languages. So, for example, in Marathi, the word is white takne or batlela, which means somebody who's impure. In a more purer form of Marathi, it's bahishkrit, or somebody who's abolished. Similarly, in different languages, there are different terms which are used, like kattu, or etc., etc. Nevertheless, the legal term, at least in the British records, is excommunication, but the terms that the governments now used are social ostracization and social boycott. So I really haven't looked into the reason as to why really the British use excommunication, but it's possible that it comes from the sources that you speak about. Now, of course, there's no baptization in the caste, but you can only be born in a caste, and there's no other way of having a membership of the caste. Now, that I think brings me to your related question of how do they know that somebody is a member of a caste. So these caste panchayats are, they're quite local, and they do know people who are the members of their caste. There are also larger caste panchayats, which are, a group of 34, 40, 50 villages. But even in that context, people know the people who belong to their castes. Their names are enough to sort of signify which castes they come from, depending on which caste you are. So nomadic tribes have their panchayats on a yearly basis in, a sort of fair that is constantly held around, let's say, a pilgrimage or a religious festival, and all members of the caste, because these are migratory castes, would come together, and they know each other from the way they dress, etc. Robert Hayden has done an excellent ethnographic account of the Nandiwala caste panchayat, if you're interested in knowing how is it that they keep track of these members. Now, what happens to those who are excluded? And how are they defined, and how do they cope? So first of all, as I said, in a lot of people whom I met who were sort of these people who were excluded by the caste panchayats, the thing that really they suffer through is this social excommunication, because the modern state has sort of made sure that they're not completely excluded from the economic life, etc., etc. So they can go to the courts, and the courts can say that no, you cannot, not allow them to till their own land, etc. So in that aspect, law enforcement works. But the law can't really help when it comes to whether those people invite you to their weddings, marriages, social customs, etc. So they do find it really, really difficult to cope. I've met victims who have been and whose families have been ostracized for generations, like 3 generations. And their children have not socialized, etc. So it's a really traumatizing experience. And there's hardly anything that the state can do in terms of it. Nevertheless, the government of Maharashtra has recently passed a law which punishes even social acts of exclusion. So they had to do a whole defining of what what can be defined as social exclusion and ostracization, and there is a state level law to do that. But of course, as you say, you can force your parents to accept your marriage, but you can't force them to have tea with you. So it's really difficult. Yeah.
Julien, thank you, Jules. Julien, would you like to follow the species path of Jules and ask a question to Anaga? Yes.
Thank you very much, Anaga, for this this presentation, and I think it's really you're bringing really a novel reading of the tradition modernity dichotomy and how caste plays out politically in that dichotomy. I wanted to ask you a question on the role of caste panchayats in self-identification, and so what kind of discourses do they produce? How are they discursively engaged in changing the self-identification of caste members as well as external identification? And of course, I've been looking a bit at caste organizations among Muslims, and these have engaged in this process called ashrafization. And so you mentioned Sanskritization in your presentation. So how do these discourses relate then to Sanskritization? Thank you.
Right. Thank you for the excellent question. So in terms of self-identification, there's no systematic literature that they produce. There's no sort of, sitting together in a seminar and discussing what we want ourselves to be, kind of an exercise. Nevertheless, if one traces how these changes have happened over a period of time, I think what gets to be called Sanskritization itself also needs to be questioned, because what these panchayats are doing is they are responding to the way the political authorities of their time have structured their access to ameliorations, whatever they may be. So depending on what these are in a particular time, that's what they try to access. Nevertheless, in the present context, the exercise of this identification is more self-conscious. And I think that can be observed most prominently in the current Maratha agitation that is on in Maharashtra, where you have, because this is a relatively prosperous caste, you have the intellectuals and political leaders of the caste coming together to sort of draw upon a subaltern history of the Marathas. So the self-identification happens by relating to, say, the King Shivaji and saying how he was a Maratha and he identified himself as a non-Brahmin caste, and therefore we also are from this subaltern roots that we have, and we therefore also should be seen as this agricultural caste who was opposed to the higher castes, etc. So this sort of more conscious self-identification happens and is happening currently in the more prosperous castes, but amongst the lower castes, it's not that coherent, so to say. That's I think would be my initial response.
Thank you, Anaga. We have a question from Professor Bilgrami. In case you would like to unmute yourself, feel free to do so.
Yeah, thanks for that excellent talk. I wanted to address the question raised, not the last one, but the one before, about the appropriateness of the term excommunication. You know, I wonder if excommunication is the right notion to ever have been used, because excommunication in Catholicism particularly is a denial of the services of grace in Christianity to a person of the flock, of the community. And so there's always a sense that one could redeem oneself through repentance, etc., and come back into the flock. I don't think that there's therefore the same sense of punitiveness that is there as is exercised by Caste Panchayats in the primordial methods that you excellently laid out. So there must be a real difference between excommunication and social ostracization in that sense. The idea in Christianity is presumably that until there's repentance and so on, you are the services of grace, etc., that the church provides is unavailable to you. That's what it consists in. But so it doesn't have the same punitive sense that Caste Panchayats exercise. It seems more like exile in, say, ancient Greece, where where the idea was that there was strict liability. If you did something that was wrong or criminal, you were polluting the ethos of the city-state, and so pollution had to be removed, and that was what exile was. Right? You simply had to remove a polluting element in the society, and that's punitive. There's no question of repentance. There's no question of being. If you were to repent, confess, etc., and show, then you could be brought back in. So it is much more finally punitive, and that's what it sounds like in the case of the Caste Panchayats exercising those primordial methods you described, rather than excommunication in the Christian sense. Am I wrong about this?
Well, if repentance is to, sort of be this criteria to, make this distinction between the Christian and the ancient Greece punitive ostracization, I think within Caste Panchayats, there is an idea of repentance. There is a provision whereby a Brahma Sabha, which is like a higher body, it's a religious body, of which we don't have many now. So at least in the medieval period, there were a lot of Brahma Sabhas which were sponsored by the royal courts. These were mostly associated with what is called a mutt or a religious center. And these did give expiation. The word used in the literature is expiation. So you have to go to this Brahma Sabha and pay the penance. So you might be asked to do certain rituals, and then the Brahma Sabha will sort of give you an expiation, and you can go back to your caste, and they can then decide whether they want to take you back or not. Among castes which are not as prosperous as to be a client of a Brahma Sabha, you have to do, lesser complicated rituals like giving a feast to the entire village, etc., etc. But there are some kind of sort of things that do not qualify for expiation. So if you are a Brahmin man who has a relationship with a Shudra woman, it's all right. But if you marry her, then there's no way you can be brought back. into the caste. So there are these qualifications. So I don't know if that would sort of bring us closer to the Christian idea of excommunication, because you are suspended from the ritual rites of the caste so long as you're ostracized. But as in when you perform those expiations, you are brought back into the caste. So that also works.
So it would be worth comparing it both with the Greek case and the Christian case to show this differential you've just pointed to between the punitive, the finally punitive cases and the unredeemable ones, and the ones that are more redeemable.
Right. Thank you so much.
Through expiation, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for this question and this answer. We have another question from Aparajita Sarkar, our postdoctoral fellow here at CSH.
Hi, thank you, Jean-Thomas, for organizing this thing. And Anaga, you were brilliant. This is the way you talked about Rudolphs. It's always like anyone who's reading them have that itchy thing going on, like there's something going wrong, and you actually nailed it. So thanks for that. I want to push you on amelioration. There is, of course, the entire, like, because I study 50s, 60s, there's an ample, by the way, a whole lot of literature on Ford Foundation and Rockefeller organizations, transnational organizations like them, focusing on self-development projects or community building projects in blocks of urbanizing villages, as they call them. And the keywords are like amelioration, democracy, instilling democracy, all that you talked about. So there is a lot that is coming up as Savarna guilt. And with add to that, the 50s and 60s also saw a lot of institutionalized Savarna guilt. Add to that, the white man's burden of like trying to teach democracy, all of that. But how do you then think about an individuated sense of amelioration, or someone who wants to, maybe because he's a migrant, or maybe she's just been too educated, she wants to interpret amelioration for herself? How does a how does a caste panchayat negotiate that sense of self, that sense of aspiration for something else without violence? Thanks.
Right. Hi, Aprajita. It's really nice to see you after a really long time. All right. So thank you for that question. See, as I was in the response that I gave to Julien, these caste panchayats are not, sort of very self-reflective. There's no continuous record of them as to what is really going on. All right, most of them are even outlawed, so it's very difficult to talk to these people, etc. But if just from intellectual curiosity, if one was to think about what is really going on, there seems to be this sort of response mechanism. So long as these panchayats are by themselves, they are doing their own thing, right? But it is always, it mostly depends on the political authorities and what is their approach to caste governance and caste panchayats, that they sort of, push through the caste groups what their demands are. So they can differ, so for example, from the Goala panchayat that I spoke about, they're outlawing two things. They're outlawing, multiple marriages, and they're also outlawing at the same time that women can't go to the market to sell milk. So there is no coherence in terms of, what amelioration is. So they're basically sort of tracking what seems to be a dominant, norm of the time. Having said that, there's also, and I think that I should connect that to a question that I missed from Jules about the difference between caste association and caste panchayat. So what we have in the immediate post-colonial period is this sort of anti-caste, sort of motivation that also comes into play. And here we have a blurry line between the caste association and the caste panchayats. So it is here that you actually have a conscious thinking of what these ameliorative gains have to be. They were first articulated, of course, very clearly by Ambedkar when he said that, we don't want to get into the temple because we think that it's going to make us better, etc. We want to go there in as a sort of rich symbolism of resistance. Now, these kind of things are also taken up by caste panchayats. They sort of, come together and decide that we are going to walk into the temple that we are not allowed in. In Rajasthan, you have caste panchayats which come together and decided that they're not going to agree to what the upper caste demand of them in the village. So you have all kinds of these examples. And I think when I think of amelioration, I make a distinction between these sort of clearly very progressive anti-casteist goals of amelioration, but there are also these very mundane sort of ameliorative gains of wanting the students from your caste to have education, to have hostels, to go abroad, even if you're not challenging what really gets taught in those schools, etc. So both those things are there. And I think that's the sort of also the distinction that I would draw in between caste associations and caste panchayats, because in caste panchayats, you have all kinds of functions, but the method remains really, it remains of excommunication. There is an understated violence which is always there, and that is complemented by the people who are members of the panchayats, because they really do gain from being the member of those groups, because the political system is, sort of set up in such a way. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank
you. Bruno Dorin, our economist here at CSH, would you like to ask your question to Anaga?
Yeah, thank you very much, Anaga, for this brilliant talk. So I'm not a political scientist, but an economist, as Jean-Thomas just said. So my question may be, I don't know how to put it, but I would say in some way when you discuss about the modernization theory and also the Mandalization of the society, etc. I wonder if you have not missed the elephant in the room, in the sense that in your talk, I mean, you talk like your colleague, you talk about Mandalization, etc. But there is no room on the political economy of agriculture through especially input subsidies. And we don't know, I was expecting from your talk that you tell us, what was the politics? Because these input subsidies, which represent billions of dollars every year, are a powerful tool for the cultivators only. I mean, those either who own or are tenant, while most of the farmer now are in fact laborers. And I think there is a lot of politics behind this to keep this power. I mean, to receive this huge amount of money and to keep the power on these subsidies. And these subsidies are of course linked to the modernization age, and link also to the technologies that this modernization is promoting. I mean, mostly industrialization. And this is, for me, missing in your talk, especially from you, because I was expecting you to also describe us, to tell us something else that the political scientists do, especially on this issue. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct in pointing out that I do not look at input subsidies specifically, or the kind of economics of it, because I mean, that's really wasn't the scope of what I was trying to do here. Nevertheless, in the book that is coming out, I have tried to look at the political economy of caste governance in the past. So I don't look at it in the contemporary era, but I do look at it from sort of 300 CE to about, the Mughal period, as to how is it that the political economy also comes into picture so far as caste governance is concerned. But so far as the contemporary period is concerned, I was trying to focus more on how does caste and politics, how do they come to interact, and how it really has an import on political modernity of India. But I think this would be another book altogether.
From the chat, we have a question from Azim Hamid. So the question is as following. Let me read it from the chat. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to comment on how do you differentiate between Caste Panchayats and caste association? Where do we draw the line between the two? Thanks.
Right. So I draw that line in my analysis with the methods that they use. So far as the methods are democratic, no matter what the goals are, I think so as the methods are democratic, the membership is not enforced, loyalties are not enforced, I think I would call that body a caste association. But so far as caste panchayats are concerned, the characteristic of a caste panchayat is its social force. The social force of ostracizing people, of having this method of, sort of excommunicating and boycotting people, and having that enforced membership on them. So that's basically how I make that differentiation conceptually. Yeah.
Thank you, Anaga. There is yes. So are there any last minute questions for? Yes, Professor Bilgami.
So, a large question that remains about what you call the preservation of caste as a result of modern political developments around biopolitics. You see, what's interesting about the rise of biopolitics is that if you take something like the Beveridge Report or the origins of the welfare idea, they were intended primarily as economic benefits for working people. And it was understood in a way that if one is adopting a welfare state, it's welfare within a framework of capitalism. And given that capitalism has more or less a permanent underclass or unemployed class, and it has a permanent distinction between classes, you could see that the very idea of welfare was intended as a permanent constraint on capital, a permanent provision. But the point of extending the welfare state from benefits to working people in a framework in which working people were permanently working people, and the managerial and salaried and capitalist class were permanently in their position. The idea of extending it to people with physical disabilities, for instance, that's also permanent, since presumably most physical disabilities are permanent. And so special dispensations for the physically. But then it got extended to historically oppressed groups, that is to say, socially disabled. And presumably socially disabled people were not permanently socially disabled. Right? There was a sense in which social disability was supposed to be overcome by benefits. But what you're suggesting is that it's precisely never overcome because the social disability is preserved by caste panchayats in order to continue getting the benefits. So there seems to be something anomalously added when you bring into biopolitics not just permanently disabled people. Within capitalism, there will always be the working people who will be exploited. Physically disabled people will be permanently physically disabled, but that's not the point of social disability. Social disability is supposed to be overcome by benefits. So there seems to be some tension here between perpetuating it for an infinity, which seems to be what is going on with the caste panchayat, and the very idea of biopolitics as it was initially introduced.
Anaga, would you like to comment on that? And we take the two last questions from the audience. Yes, Anaga?
Sure. So you want me to comment first, or you want to take the questions?
If you could
together?
comment.
Yeah, I think we should do that
now.
first.
And yes.
Okay, so I think what Professor Bilgami is pointing to is a sort of continuous tension, which is imminent to the way caste politics works in India today. And I think that also has to do with the fact that somewhere down the line, as we got to celebrate this caste-based democratization, the goal of annihilation of caste simply gets lost. So when I use the word biopolitics, I use it to mean this exercise that the post-colonial state gets into, not just with Mandalization, but more explicitly with Mandalization of politics, wherein you have this rational categorization of a political identity of what a caste is. And then, of course, it says that it will keep updating lists. And once you have, a particular socioeconomic condition is reached, we will again revise the list, but that never happens. And I think what you're pointing out to is also, it also implicates the way political parties and in general the political dispensation works in compliance with these caste panchayats to continue this culture of benefits on both sides. So I think that really, because so long as it works only in terms of quotas and in terms of these kind of benefits, and not speak to the goals of annihilation of caste eventually. Because what this rational categorization is doing is it is, in a sense, creating these political identities and fixing them in a political system that can only think of amelioration through those identities and not by annihilating those identities. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but I mean, that's how I can think of a response.
Thank you, Anaga. We have a question from Satish Chinor from CSSC Kolkata, and then I will read that question, and I will invite Bhupendra Kumar to unmute himself and ask his question right after mine, so that we can conclude on that. So Satish is asking, he's curious to know the difference between your work and the one of Ramesh Berry. First of all, and second, he has a more specific question: how different the intermediate caste, dominant caste are different in bringing their caste member together? Question mark. is there homogeneity, or were there events influence them to change the course of action? Bhupendra, would you?
I got the first question. All right.
The second question, I am just you can find the question in the chat box maybe,
right. Okay.
while Bhupendra is stepping in.
Thank you, Anaga, for your wonderful presentation, and thank you for drawing upon caste panchayats and caste politics in India. I was going through your presentation, and I found two things very interesting. First is that how people were registering them for social mobility through this Sanskritization in government offices, that they were registering through other names in government offices just to get a social mobility. And the second thing about the caste panchayats and its role in the mobility in terms of social and political mobility as a modern tool for participation. So I was wondering, like, I was recalling the study of Owen Lynch, where he was suggesting that Jatos might have used this Sanskritization before independence, but after independence they have used caste as a intensified political participation tool for quest for moving into highly observable positions. And the second thing, that how do you see, like, uh, the mobilization of the idea of Great Chamar in context of Bhim army? Then they are transcending from the idea of Great Chamar. Initially they started against the Rajput violence in western Uttar Pradesh, and they transcended it to the Bhim army, and now they are like participating as a political party. So how do you see this Sanskrit and the kind of flawed like conception of Sanskritization is not like the adequate like category to understand this mobility, and to also to counter this Hindu nationalist project of Indian state? So if you please
Right. Anaga, would you like to wrap up on these two interventions?
Sure. So thank you, Satish. So I think the first question really is what role region plays in articulating caste concerns. Regions, of course, as I said, play a really important role. So even within a single state, we might find uh, the same castes behaving very differently, or as I gave the examples of the Dhobi caste, for example, which articulates its concerns very differently in Maharashtra and quite differently in Delhi, etc. So though this is true, I think because of the analytical exercise that one takes up, one has to draw a few generalizations. And I think caste panchayat is a category which does make itself available for that. And therefore, I insist on this method function distinction, which I think it helps me methodologically to think about the Indian polity as a whole, despite the fact that there are many regional differences. Then I think the second question was about how I differentiate between intermediate castes, dominant castes, how different they are in bringing their caste members together. Okay, so the dominant caste category really, I think, was very useful when thinking of caste politics, when it worked in the Jati cluster kind of formulation, which it does not do anymore. But when it was the dominant castes, which could be understood for simplification as the Jajman caste, it mobilized and brought together caste members, not only in an intra-caste panchayat, but in a multi-caste panchayat, where the castes which were dependent upon them were also part of the diktats of that caste panchayat. So the way or the formula through which they brought the castes together was the relationship of dependence, right? Whereas if one is speaking of intermediate castes, this is again a fuzzy category, but let's remove dominant castes from this intermediate castes. So we are speaking about the non-Savarna, non-landed castes here. So if that is what you mean by intermediate castes, then we have to differentiate between those who are really dominant in terms of their land ownership, in terms of their control over Jajmani relations or Baluta relations, and those that are below them. For the castes which are below them but still might qualify as intermediate in the hierarchy, for them, very different methods are used for bringing caste members together. And here we see intra-caste social ostracization. So ostracization of one's own members and bringing them to compliance via these methods. Yeah. And then to move on to Bhupendra's question. So this flawed category of Sanskritization is something that I agree with. And I think the flaw of that category is because it is used in a very expansive way. I think even more expansive than what Srinivas himself used, M.N. Srinivas himself used it as. So of course, there's no sort of agreement amongst all the lower castes that, you know, we want to take up this practice of Sanskritization wherein we want to become like these upper castes. That is not the idea. So as I said, while I was answering Aprajita's question, it's basically trying to catch up with the norm of political governance at the time, and what the caste needs to do for the betterment of its member. It can be in terms of material, social, or educational counts. Now, coming to your question about the Great Chamar movement, I think this distinction of the non-anti-caste, I won't say they are pro-caste, but the non-anti-caste kind of caste organizations that caste panchayats are, they're not anti-caste organizations. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, the anti-caste organizations such as organizations that you spoke of, the Great Chamar movement, for example, which is characteristically speaking against the hierarchy of caste. So the caste panchayats does that in some cases, but that is not what is the prime agenda of these caste panchayats. It's basically group preservation. On the other hand, these organizations such as the Great Chamar, etc., while holding on to the caste identity, is actually challenging the hierarchy and making an anti-caste or at least anti-varna kind of articulation. So I think we're speaking about two very different sort of organizations here. And I study the form of the caste panchayats and not these organizations. But I think these are not associations, but rather movements that speak and have a larger political agenda, a more explicit political agenda than these even caste associations have in terms of seeking support from political parties to get participation in terms of it can be political representative leadership or just getting benefits, etc. So I think that's the kind of distinction that I would draw. But nevertheless, this idea of Sanskritization as a conceptual category to think of anything that lower caste members do for their betterment is quite rightly being questioned in the scholarship. And I use the term the way it is used in the politicization of caste literature, the literature that I'm criticizing. So there are a lot of orthodoxies in this literature. Caste association is just one of those orthodoxies. The orthodoxy of Sanskritization, the orthodoxy of the dominant caste, the orthodoxy of a multi-village, multi-caste panchayat as the panchayat that then gets adopted into the Panchayati Raj system as this ideal system that we have, etc., are many of the orthodoxies that are being challenged and need to be challenged more. So.
Thank you, Anaga, for all these answers. So I would like to thank you, Dr. Anaga Ingole, for your erudite presentation, for engaging with such a lively audience, and of course, for all those who contributed to this very stimulating session. I would like to take this opportunity to invite all of you for our next session on 31st of May, in which we will be receiving Irudaya Ranjan from IMAD on migrants in COVID times. And I also would like to extend my thanks to the organizer of the sessions, who are contributing sometimes in the background to things to go smoothly. It is the case of Niru Gohar, which is here, and Clément, who has always been with us for all the technical issues. So on the behalf of CSH, thank you for also contributing to make this session a success. So once again, thank you, Anaga. Jules, you have raised hands purposively, or maybe no. Right. So on behalf of CSH, once again, thank you, and let's reconvene, all of us, or almost all of us, in 15 days.
Thank you, everyone who took out time and joined us today. And all of those who are in Delhi, please take care, and others also, but especially those who are in Delhi. Thank you so much, Julian, for asking me. Thank you, Jatama. Thank you, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.